A very warm welcome back to you, and I'm aiming to conclude this book reading or extracts of the book reading in this session. First of all, let me point out for some of you who have just dropped in, I did not write this book. I've written this textbook, but not this one. I'm merely reading from it. Chapter 10, Rock Bottom. A part of me could, of course, understand why Carl wanted to sell Valegro. Like me, Carl had to work hard for a living. He didn't have a rich family to support him, and at the end of the day, he still had to pay his mortgage. At the time, Carl was also facing losing Utopia. He only had a minority share in Utopia, and after the Olympics, life-changing amounts of money were being offered for both horses. So it is very difficult to decline offers when you've trained a horse to Olympic level and the horse is winning medals. And as Charlotte found with her horse Des, if the horse becomes injured, potentially there's no value there, or certainly not until the horse has been fully rehabilitated. Des was never going to be the horse I needed him to be. And I knew in my heart of hearts that he was better off going somewhere he could be a star in his own right. If Blueberry did have to be sold, I wasn't going to have any say in where he went, and that for me was almost the hardest thing to deal with. So she's trained Valegro for 6-7 years, and she has no share in him, financial share. So she's concerned that the horse can be sold. But I also felt that he did not owe Carl or me anything. What he'd done and what I'd achieved with him was unheard of. And he'd given so much, not just to me, but to the sport and to the whole country. So yes, it is gutting, not just when top sport horses get sold, but when they have to be sold abroad because there isn't the amount of money within their country of origin to keep them here. So it is a fact of life with elite sport horses. I didn't want to be selfish because I knew what a difference the money would make to everyone. So she's come back to the money side of things. But at the same time, I was angry with Carl. He wouldn't discuss things with me. So yeah, she's done the bulk of the work on this horse, and she's angry because she has no say in what happens to him. I have enormous respect for Carl. I felt that if we could have talked things through more, I would have been better able to cope with the situation. But here you are, you have a young rider whose dream is to work with Carl. He's given her the opportunity. Yeah, there weren't any wages, but she was given a massive opportunity and mentored and provided with a horse. So I can see how this would be a business arrangement between those who owned the horse, which was Carl and one other, I believe. Things got pretty heated and my behaviour made Carl quite cross at times. So she got quite stroppy with this. So she doesn't sound like she was very accepting. And yeah, I understand it's difficult, but she knew for quite a long time that the situation was building up to Valegro being sold, but it's really annoying her that she has no involvement. She hasn't been consulted about it. The thought that I might lose him made me feel like my heart was being ripped out and wrenched in every direction. He was a massive part of me, and the relationship I had with him was unique. Yes, it was. He was delivering on her ambitions. The sale didn't go through. Christmas was coming up. Carl was thinking about Olympia. He still had Utopia, who wasn't yet sold, but he had decided that this would be their last show as a combination. I genuinely didn't know if I wanted to go to Olympia. Since September, I had been made #1 in the FEI world rankings, so she's got right to the top here with Valegro. I wanted to finish my career with Blueberry at our best. If we didn't have a future, my first reaction was that I wanted to go out on the high of winning double gold at the Olympics and not risk anything going wrong. So, doesn't sound like she wants to keep riding him. It just explains that he was a vehicle. She's referring to her career and going out at the top, and that was her first reaction. And Ian, her associate, has always been my shoulder to cry on, the person who picks me up and puts me in the place I mentally need to be. People often think he's my partner. Carl, on the other hand, is not very sympathetic if you're ill, whereas if he's ill, he's dying. And just as I was about to go into the freestyle, he scared me to death. So she's riding Valegro in the freestyle. I could see Carl at the entrance frantically telling me to hurry up and get in to the ring. It completely threw me, and I messed up the start of the test because Blueberry and I were both tense. So doesn't take much to derail her. I was just happy when we came out with 87.95%. Carl was third, so she was like nearly 8% ahead of the rider in second place, Isabel Worth, and Carl was third with his final ride on Utopia. So it felt like a great way to end the year. But soon as the magic Olympia bubble burst, I came smashing back to reality. Christmas Eve, I found out that another buyer was interested in Valegro. Fame isn't important to me. It's not why I ride. Possibly not, but she's already stated many times that ambition is. Finding a horse that I can work with and train is what I love, more than going out and competing and trying to do well. That doesn't quite fit with what she said before, unless of course she's referring to this urge, to this game of overcoming any obstacle. But she does like to win. She has said before in this book that she rides to win. End of January. Meanwhile, Blueberry still hadn't sold. Potential buyers had also dropped out. For the rest of the year, things hung in the balance. But ultimately, Carl and the other joint owner decided they were going to keep him. They formed a syndicate. Now, I don't know why they decided to keep him. And announced in the press that they were looking for investors. Another owner became the third of Blueberry's owners in January 2014, so by the following year. And we all knew he would be staying with us for the rest of his life. November, I had bought a beautiful grey mare, Florentina, along with her mum and another sharer. She was only 2, coming 3, and would spend another year turned away in a field, but I already knew she was going to be a super horse. Presumably she's quite pretty as well, because Charlotte seems to be averse to what she terms as an ugly horse. I haven't read anything in the book about her childhood and her competing in beauty pageants. So I just wonder what this obsession with looking good is. If you're a competitive rider and the horse moves well, then what does it matter if the horse is ugly or not? But she's not what I would term a strikingly pretty girl herself, so I just wonder where that comes from. December, she found out she had been awarded an OBE. Carl and Laura had both been made MBEs, which is a step below. Here's some more images here. Receiving her OBE and riding in various competitions. And Valegro's groom, Alan, who she admits she wouldn't have got to where she was without him being part of the team. So a shout out for the grooms there. I had lots of other positive things in my life and other horses that I wanted to ride, including now Utopia. With European and Olympic golds under his belt, Carl felt that he'd done everything he wanted to with Uti. She was given an amazing opportunity to get more experience, and she already loved riding Uti at home. He isn't the easiest horse to ride, and he'd got to the point with Carl where he knew the Grand Prix inside out, and he'd started to get a little bit cheeky, which would be disobedient in Charlotte's world. With me, though, he was feeling super. You just wait, Carl kept saying. You wait. They got to Saumur, warmed up, and Uti felt brilliant. Then, as we were going round the outside and about to go into the arena, he suddenly said, "No thanks." Of course, Charlotte's not used to horses saying no. He was like a snail. He did not want to go, and with Blueberry I'm thinking it, and we're doing it. With Uti I was thinking it, and nothing was happening. So she's got this tremendous amount of experience working up to Grand Prix level on basically one horse. And then when she takes the ride on another one, things don't go so well for her. I was kicking. I was sweating. I've never puffed so much in my life as I did trying to get him round that test. Okay, so lack of harmony there. And her reaction is to kick, push. It was not something I was used to. And when I came out, Carl could not stop laughing, so that couldn't have gone down well. Uti didn't have any reason to behave that way other than the fact he was being very cheeky and idle. She just doesn't like it when these horses don't work for her. We won with Carl second. I was determined there wasn't going to be a repeat performance in the freestyle. Uti is a stallion, but he also needed a bit of squashing down. What's squashing down? I haven't seen anything in the FEI guidelines for that. He was trying to be a typical man and take over. And as I rode into the freestyle, I'd made up my mind he was never going to play around with me again. This is frightening. It's frightening. So what does she do? She doesn't tell us. She doesn't give us any training tips here. I wanted to see if I could replicate Valegro's performance on UT. A bit of the feeling I got with Blueberry, Valegro, and in the end I did, but it was 10 times harder. So it sounds like she can really put up a struggle with these horses, and that to me is not harmonious. That's not what dressage is about. But she came out with 81%. Which was 7 points ahead of Carl. They were first and second, but more importantly, I was able to go home feeling that I hadn't completely failed to follow in Carl's footsteps. So again, the competition here, that Carl was winning on Utopia, therefore, to prove herself, she also had to win on Utopia, and she won with a very clear margin, pushing and pulling and kicking and sweating. We took them both back to France for Compiègne in June, but things didn't go to plan. First day he was fine, then he got bitten by a fly, right where his saddle went. It wouldn't have been fair to continue, but I was very disappointed to have to withdraw. The upside, however, was that it gave me more time to kick Carl's butt into shape with Golly. Just some interesting language there. And that it almost feels like when she has to step up to the plate, it involves aggression. And this horse was a very expressive mover, but he was also a real chicken. Why does she have to be so disparaging about these horses, one after the other? If they're not perfect to her, like Valegro, who wasn't entirely perfect because she had to use so much rein contact that her arms burned with him, but she clearly likes them to be willing and submissive. He was afraid of everything. That's the annoying thing about horses. You can have a horse with all the talent in the world, but if it doesn't have the right mentality, it doesn't matter. Yeah, but then how do they get them to Grand Prix level if they're lacking in motivation? Carl won both the Grand Prix and the Special. Then it was on to Rotterdam in June for Blueberry's first run of the year. Blueberry wasn't really on my aids and had gone back to being really strong. So he's become quite a puzzle to her again, as he was in his early days. He was also starting to question me a little. So potentially resisting, which he'd never done before. Going down the last centre line, he got a bit sneaky and tried to stop. Well, why? Most horses change when they get to their third year at Grand Prix, so it wasn't a surprise. The first year they don't have the experience, so they're relying on you as a rider. Year 2 they know a bit more. Your job is a bit easier, everything's more established and polished. Year 3, and they really start to know the test, so then your job is to stop them anticipating and trying to take control. I wonder how she does that. They're clever animals and just doing what we've taught them. So she's acknowledging that horses have intelligence, but they must submit to her. Although it wasn't my best test with Blueberry, 82% was enough for first. The new plan was that he'd take UT to the Europeans, this is Carl, and that both of us would have our final run through at Hickstead a few weeks before. In the meantime, both horses had to be got fit without actually working them harder, which meant regular sessions on the water treadmill at Hartbury. So good, they're not just being ridden to fitness. Not long before, Carl suggested that I change Blueberry's bit. He was getting so strong and we thought it might give me more control. So yeah, using the bit, the double bridle, the double bit to control the horse. Warming up for the Grand Prix, I realised it had been a mistake, but by that point it was too late. I was upset with myself because the changes were totally down to rider error, not being able to operate the bit. My legs froze up. Carl was always shouting at me about forgetting to move them. You have to hold him back, keep him short, use your legs. So yeah, that's how these Grand Prix horses were being trained here, holding on to the front end until your arms burn. This is not harmony. In any case, although we won both the Grand Prix and Special, we should have done much better, so it wasn't enough for her. At the start of the Special, I'd even felt we could have gone on to get another world record. So she's getting quite, dare I say, taking it for granted that Valegro could continue to deliver and not accepting that he's struggling to do so. So he's getting very strong. They've changed the bit and things aren't working to plan. But mostly it was just Carl screaming at me and picking me up on every single little thing. So this just makes me think, why, after all this training and having a highly competent mentor, why does she keep forgetting? Why does she have to be screamed at? Where's the progression? Does she have gaps in her training? Was it all happening? It did happen so fast. It made me really focus and sharpen up. Well, she was always focused. We ended up running through the entire test 3 times, which is a lot. And even when Carl was satisfied that something looked right, if it didn't feel right to me, we did it again. Could they not just get creative with this? Why is it repetition, repetition, repetition? And referring to Blueberry, I think it's important to let him know when he's done something well. Reward is a big part of the way we work with our horses, and the aim is always to make sure that they lead a happy, healthy life. Well, what about the horse in the video? Where was that horse's reward? I just think there are gaps. She clearly can't go from horse to horse without problems. Training sessions she's yelled and yelled at because she either can't apply what's needed or she forgets, in my view. But Carl's philosophy and management style, which I've learned, is that horses need to be horses. It doesn't matter how precious they are. It's good for their bodies to be moving around and it's good for their brains. They need that free time just chilling out and eating grass. Yes. It's the same when we train them. For us, it's never drill, 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 push, push, push. Well, I've just read that it's drill, 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 push, push, push. The horses we ride are athletes too. And we have to think about keeping them fit and sound long term. You can't expect horses to last if you're pushing their bodies 7 days a week. Oh, it's good that they get time off. Because Blueberry always needed to improve his walk, hill work was a great way of making him stride out, as opposed to just walking faster and faster. But I think a lot of dressage riders are guilty of only riding in an arena, not even with a few poles on the ground, just riding and hoping that eventually the horse will understand what the rider wants. I don't like her training style. It doesn't fit with all my learning and certification about training any athlete, not just horses. Doesn't fit at all. To me, it's cruel to just keep riding them until they submit, until they conform, until they get right what the rider has in mind for them. It must be a very miserable life, a miserable training session for a horse to know that there's just very little reward and very little give here, very little learning even. Carl is so tall he rides with his stirrups 6 holes longer. We all have our own way of riding, the advanced moves, which is another reason why I'd never want to buy a ready-made horse. Okay, so it's about training the horse to adapt to the rider's way of going, the rider's way of communicating with them. Everything's very personalised at the top level, and so Carl will sometimes struggle to do things on my horses and I'll struggle with his. But working with Carl has helped me learn to keep my cool whatever is thrown at me, and it always seems to be that the more pressure I'm under, the better I ride. Well, just seems to me if the horse isn't performing, she gets very frustrated and somewhat aggressive. By now, I'd been on such a high for so long that I was bound to have a fall. But knowing that didn't make it any less tough. We all knew that Blueberry didn't like heat, but the weather when we arrived in Aachen was so hot and humid, even I didn't want to be outdoors. We ended up 6th with 76.9%, which was 7 points behind the winner. It was a situation I'd never been in before with Blueberry, so not being placed first is somewhat not an option for her. And although Carl was supportive, it was a shock to both of us. Blueberry and I are not machines, but we'd been performing so consistently that to finish unplaced was a real blow. We hadn't lost like that in over 2 years. Afterwards, I locked myself in the lorry with Ian so that no one could come and speak to me. So she just finds it very difficult to not win. Reading comments, and win by a big margin too. Reading comments on the internet is something I've always avoided. So presumably she won't be watching me, because I know how vicious people can be. Vicious? Riders can end up being portrayed as monsters. Yes. Which I find deeply upsetting. I mean, have we got someone with a split personality here? I know my horses and Carls are happy in what they do, and that as riders we love them to bits. But they have to win. The vibe had been horrible, and I really didn't think I could go through it again. But for the first time I felt afraid. I was afraid of getting it wrong. I was afraid of making mistakes. And I was afraid of being criticised by people. Well, you sure were going to be criticised for whipping that horse relentlessly. And even now, I still don't understand fully why she did that. There's obviously parts of that story that are missing. These were emotions I'd never experienced before when I was competing, and I felt completely out of my depth. So yeah, here you have someone with relentless ambition. She's winning everything there is to win at the highest level, and she won't settle for anything less. And it's a terrible blow to her when she doesn't succeed. As I rode into the arena, I had tears in my eyes. The fear was awful. "You'll be fine, Eddie," Carl kept saying, but the soundtrack in my head telling me I couldn't do it was drowning him out. She did better, coming second. Nevertheless, I went home shaken. Blueberry hadn't been at the top of his game, but normally when he didn't give his best, it was still enough. He couldn't be brilliant every time, but I'd been fortunate in never having a bad ride until now, and knew I was going to need some help picking myself up again. Well, what about Blueberry? There was clearly a problem there. What about the horse? Why didn't she question that he wasn't performing, beyond saying it was too hot? So she entered into a sports psychology program. People don't always understand the time and effort that goes into training horses, and almost all riders have had the experience of rides being taken away from them. It had happened to me so much as a kid that after nearly losing Blueberry in 2012, I decided my days of getting on anything were over. Okay, so this is a reference to her childhood and the issue of horses being trained by her and sold on. I didn't want to be in the same situation of powerlessness again. Okay, so here's another clue. She felt as a child that she had no say, and also we've read that it was quite upsetting for her to be excluded from Valegro's negotiations when he was up for sale. And now I only train and compete horses that I have at least a 50% share in. Okay, so financially, when the horses have to move on, she at least is remunerated. So this reads like it bothers her, despite the great experience she may have with top horses. It's important to her to at least part own the horse. Teaching has taken me all around the world, and it's something I love doing. I don't beat around the bush. If you've come for a lesson, you've got to be open to criticism. But I love trying to encourage people to be better. So what happened to the young rider that was seated on a horse that was being whipped so severely? What was the rider supposed to do? Didn't sound at that point like she was encouraged to be better. I try to make it fun as well. Well, sorry, that didn't look like a lot of fun. My life would be impossible without my manager, or the mentor, or the groom. When my manager came on board, everything changed. She's ruthlessly efficient and has incredible business sense. It wasn't until I started working with her that I realised having 2 gold medals meant I was probably worth more than I thought I was. Yeah, so getting a sense of her value. This year also saw a chance for my younger horses to step forward and for another partnership, this time a human one, to take off. In 2003, she decided to use her Masters in Business Administration to found the Mount St John Equestrian Stud at her home in Yorkshire. This was the person she partnered up with. She asked me if I'd be interested in riding for her. So there must have been a price tag attached for that. The first dressage horse that she bought, the partner bought, was a 5-year-old German mare. Being young, she was still quite weak when I started training her, but I could already feel there was something in there, and after a few months I knew she was going to be a special horse. As with Blueberry, it felt like we clicked. She had that same desire to please. In May, I also made my debut with Florentina, the young horse whom she'd bought back in 2012. So still a young horse. For a while there'd been a question mark over her because she was so bolshy when she was being backed. Even though she was a great mover, there's nothing you can do if the willingness to be ridden and trained aren't there. So at what point does she decide that there are training issues? And why would she pick up a lunge whip and whip a horse so ferociously and relentlessly in the space of a minute when a horse doesn't even belong to her, is not going to be competed by her, and is being ridden by a young rider? I honestly think that that situation could have turned out very grave indeed, and I hope that the FEI see that it's not just the abuse of the horse, it's the potentially dangerous, very dangerous situation that that young rider could have been placed in. That is not what coaches are about. After a few shows on her as a 5-year-old, and with my hopes high, I decided to breed from her while she was still young and at the beginning of her career. They used embryo transfer, and now she has a foal that's a half brother to Blueberry. So yeah, great. Exciting, very exciting potential. On both Flora and Freestyle, it felt funny being back riding at little local shows. So she has to start from the bottom here with these horses. Going into the Europeans at Aachen in August, I was on edge. The experience I'd had there in 2014 was at the back of my mind. Again, Blueberry and I needed to pull in the big marks if we were going to get a podium place. So was it the memory of 2014 that was to blame for the mistakes I ended up making? Because I, for one, couldn't understand it. I'm normally so consistent. What the hell was going on? Well, Valegro has lost some form for some reason. The result was that although I finished with the highest score, 83.029, it was less than 1% more than Edward had scored with Undercover. So we went away with the silver and the Dutch went away with the gold. So she's losing some sparkle here. Things aren't going well. Valegro is not on the top form that he was. She won this, but not by the 5-6-7% that she used to. She's got a silver medal. I was so disappointed, but rather than wishing or hoping it was going to come right in the special, I had to give myself a kick up the backside and go in fighting. It's always a fight with her. I wanted that gold medal. And when another rider came out with over 83%, it just made me hungrier. So she gets really triggered by competitive situations. I set out with my mind made up that I was going out to get her. Again, some aggression. And I did coming back with 87.577, so 4% ahead, nearly 5 perhaps. And by now, day 4, Blueberry was beginning to feel tired and the humidity was taking its toll. Blueberry and I were about to enter the arena and I saw her score of 88.8% flash up on the electronic scoreboard. A camera operator suddenly zoomed in on Isabel, who'd ridden earlier and was now eating an ice cream in the crowd. As her face appeared on the huge screen, everybody started laughing. Hello, I thought, I'm trying to do a test here. So she wants the attention on her at all times while she's in the ring. Then my marks were announced. I'd beaten that rider with the high score, but only just. And as soon as my new score flashed up, the crowd started to boo. It was the worst feeling. I'd only been doing my job and I was being made to feel that I didn't deserve the win. At the time of prize giving, Carl was getting ready to go home. I begged him not to leave me because I was petrified that I'd be booed when I went to get my medal and couldn't think of anything more horrible. I didn't know if I could face that. Well, no, she just can't. Losing is not an option to her, and there's a very strong emotional attachment to winning, as I see it, which is very sad. It doesn't make for somebody being comfortable in their skin, and yet she keeps going out there, because she's a comparatively young rider, and she's winning, doesn't really know what it's like to not win. And not winning makes her feel very uncomfortable and unsettled. The seating was a long way back from the action, and for our lap of honour, we'd been told to keep to the arena and not ride out onto the grass outside. Well, blow that. I wanted to interact with everyone who made the effort to come, so I cantered out of the arena and round the outside, waving and being clapped all the way. So some disobedience there. Blueberry was now 12 and a half, and after Aachen, some of the press suggested that he was beginning to show his age. Really, all that had happened was that we'd had a few blips and he'd been tired in the heat. When you're so much in the spotlight, everything gets blown up out of proportion. Being subjected to that kind of scrutiny is just part and parcel of being at the top. And it didn't affect the plans Carl and I had made. Blueberry had already had quite an intense year, and they decided that she would take Ute to Olympia at Christmas and save Blueberry for Rio. So it just sounds like it wasn't worth risking Blueberry not performing well. Drilling him to the point of brain deadness would have been counterproductive. Well, she did drill him. They would repeat over and over again until the movement was satisfactory. I wanted him to be enjoying the moves and working because he wanted to, not because I was making him. Okay, so why keep applying this severely intense rein pressure? Why ride him until your arms are burning? When you force a horse, dressage starts to look ugly, not harmonious, and harmony is always the goal. So I just don't see harmony in everything she does. If there's one person I don't mind coming second to, it's Carl. Well, that's good. As he'd never won at Olympia before, I couldn't have been more thrilled for him. Even after London 2012, people would sometimes question whether dressage was a proper Olympic sport. Well, they're questioning it even more now since her whipping abuse video. It's not a comment that's ever been made to me directly. Well, I'd say the FBI will be mentioning it. But my response would be this: if you think it's so easy, you should jump on and try giving it a go. Well, yeah, but you have admitted that it's easier when the horses are trained to the rider's techniques, to the rider's individual techniques. So no, we've been told that it's not easy to just jump on another dressage horse and have them perform to the same level as the regular rider. I don't think there's any way I'll still be competing myself when I'm in my 70s. Neither do I. I'd love to, but I suffer with my back as it is now. Now, this is a big issue, riders riding while in pain. And it's the topic of my doctoral studies, where I've run a survey, and we can expect some 80% of riders to be riding, competing while they're in pain, or having developed pain as a result of riding for various reasons. So riders who ride in pain, this is going to impact on their ability to function posturally while riding. They're going to have weaknesses, and add a saddle that doesn't quite fit the rider optimally, that's going to exacerbate the problem and just make it harder for them to communicate the aids, to stabilise and synchronise with the horse's movement. And research has shown that. I'd been suffering with my back before Rio. Well, what about her world-class team? Why wasn't her back pain addressed? Although we have to remember that it is more difficult for riders with back pain to stop riding until their pain is resolved. And also, this pain has been found to be mild to moderate, so not so severe that they can't keep riding. And also for professional riders, it's not really an option. And research has also found that many of them, I think the number is about half of them, will self-diagnose, self-manage and self-medicate their pain. Because back pain in athletes doesn't always show up as a pathology. My plan was just to do what I do for every test, which is to visualise myself going down the centre line at home with Carl sitting at the bottom yelling at me to try harder. The first day I rode him, things didn't go to plan. He was stiff from travelling and incredibly strong. Here we go again. I had Carl in my ear telling me what to do, but what he was saying didn't feel right to me, so I was trying not to listen. She's quite dependent on Carl, even after 7+ years. Although it was hot, I knew that if I just kept playing with Blueberry and got him relaxed and listening to me, we'd be fine. If I left it, as Carl was telling me to do, I'd come back the next day and Blueberry wouldn't be any better. I knew him so well that I just kept going, but that made Carl cross, and as soon as I got off, he had a moan. "You've got to listen to me. You're doing too much with him." Too much work, too much riding, too much in terms of overriding him as the technique. Not sure. You've got to listen to me, she says, because what it feels like and what it looks like are completely different. Well, yeah, I can vouch for that. Do you want me to win a gold medal or not? Stop stressing. Stop shouting at me. I'm shouting at you because you're not listening to me. I think that's Charlotte. So, things don't go as smoothly as we have been led to believe with riding these top dressage horses. I still couldn't watch them. This is Carl. I warmed Carl up, helped him with his final preparations, and then I walked away. So it just seems odd to me that Carl needs help with his preparations. What is it about the psychology of this sport that riders are perhaps, or these riders are dependent on somebody to give them a last minute tweak before they go in? Is it related to their pain? Do they need a distraction from their pain? Do they need to be reminded that they have to overcome their pain to get the job done? This is an interesting phenomenon to me, that this is what they need. It made me feel quite disloyal doing it, but I just can't watch Carl. My stomach churns and I get butterflies. Plus I knew I had to focus and get myself into a good place for my own test a few hours later. So interesting that she can't watch him perform. Back to Blueberry. Half the time when I rode him, I felt like I was barely doing anything. Riding him was all about being light and sympathetic. Well, how could it be light and sympathetic if your arms are burning because you've got so much contact on the reins, is my question. And as long as you were light and sympathetic, he just gave and gave. Well, yeah, he must have been screaming to have the rider be light and sympathetic with him. And I do find that when I'm working with riders, when the rider's posture has been adjusted and they learn to support themselves more and become more stable and synchronized, the horses, they just bloom and their movement improves so much. And it's as if the horse is saying, by exaggerating the movement as being correct movement, the horse is saying, yes, this is what I want, this is how I want you to sit. I go well when you sit like that or do that. Team Silver was the medal we were really fighting for. That was the one they ended up bringing home. I admit that I was a bit disappointed. The perfectionist in me wants to nail it every time out. And I hadn't done what I wanted to do. We'd done so much, won so much, it couldn't get any better. Why keep going to the point where we started coming second or third? So she's getting near the point of realising that Valegro is losing his form, and she resents coming second or third. That to me wasn't what I was doing it for. Blueberry had given me more than I'd ever dreamed of and owed me nothing, absolutely nothing. I wanted him to finish at the top, where everybody would remember him as the best horse there was. Now she wanted to finish at the top too, I would say. Again, coming second, third, sixth is just not an option for her. The pressure and the expectation would keep building, and Blueberry didn't need that. yeah, so there does come a day when the horse doesn't perform as successfully, and yeah, they have to take a step back, be removed from that level of competition, because bodies don't go on forever. I didn't want him finishing up as an older horse, not able to give what he used to, and open to all the criticism that would bring. Yeah, so it would be her that they would be criticising, and she doesn't like criticism, is what I read earlier. I wanted us to finish at the very top, and that was as Olympic gold medalists. And yeah, many riders in all disciplines just don't know when to stop, don't know when to draw the line or withdraw and finish at their best. Even though she knew Valegro wasn't at his best, very best, and potentially was beginning to decline. I said to Alan, presume the groom, if it all goes to plan and I win gold, I'm going to retire him after this. But she didn't have a share in him at that point. So presume she means she's going to not ride him after that. Presumably the owners would have decided his competition future. Then I walked out and the heat was like a smack in the face. It was over 30 degrees. Knowing how Blueberry was in the heat, I instantly started to worry. The nerves I experienced then were like nothing I'd ever felt before. Usually the bigger the competition, the more I want to get out there. Bring it on. This time my heart was pounding through my jacket and my legs were like jelly. I can't feel my legs, I said to Carl. I'm so nervous, I can't feel my legs. Yeah, because she knew there was a chance that she may not win. But she got 93.857% and first place. Just a month after Rio, I went to the National Championships and won 6 different titles on 6 different horses, but not at Grand Prix level. These presumably are the younger horses that she was bringing on. I didn't want to be thought of as a one-trick rider, and now I could show people what I'd been doing when I hadn't been on Valegro. So just a minor detail missing there. When you ride an animal and you know they've given you their all and there's nothing left, it's the most amazing feeling. Yeah, she demands they give their all, is what I'm reading. It's not just when you're riding a horse that you build up a partnership with them, it's when you handle them on the ground. I love proving people wrong. I'd always wanted a jazz offspring. They're spooky, quirky horses and generally very talented. Yeah, she loves a challenge. But the first time I saw him in the stable, he was wild. He looked petrified of life. So this is so sad to me. Unless he'd been turned away for several years to grow and develop and hadn't been handled much, that's not all that unusual, and that's not always a bad thing. To just leave them to grow and mature as young horses. I think that was what made me want to buy him. Challenge. I wanted to nurture him and convince him living wasn't that scary. I wonder if she did. When I started lunging him and put the roll around his stomach, I thought he was going to explode. Okay, so why not? Why? Was this the first time he was lunged? His head went straight up in the air and he wouldn't breathe. So yeah, very frightened horse. If I'd got on him and been scared, he would have had a nervous breakdown. But because I got on him and made him feel as though he could do it, he believed me. Yeah, and that is part of being a strong rider, a mentally strong rider. I don't mean strong as in your arms are burning trying to hold them. One of the lovely things about the position I'm lucky enough to be in is that it means I can give something back. In 2015, I became a global ambassador for Brook, a charity that seeks to improve the welfare of working horses and donkeys. If you hadn't heard, Brooke dropped her when the whipping video emerged, and rightly so, in my view. So, how wrong they were. There have been so many occasions when I've been in the right place at the right time, that's for sure, and everything has fallen into place for me, yeah. But I do also feel that I've worked my hardest and grafted to get where I am today. That's not unusual. What I hope my story proves is that if you're dedicated and want something enough, even if people tell you it isn't possible, you can find ways and means of achieving it. Yeah, that's in your own words, is that you, Charlotte, didn't stop at anything to achieve. I owe so many thanks to everyone who's made my career possible, and I don't see Valegro on that list. With Valegro, I was able to make my very own fairy tale come true, and now I can't wait for the next chapter to unfold. Well, we all know that's not going to end well. So that's the end of the book. Overall, I think this book is a shocking, to me, it's a horrific account of what horses have to go through. Horses under her control have to go through, or had to go through, to fulfill her ambition to always win. I will continue with the FEI and the processes going on there. So thank you for watching, and I'll be back soon.